I wanted to present to you today the cloud native maturity model. Personally, I've been in a bunch of technology roles over the years. Some of the roles I've been in are software engineer, solution architect. I was the CEO of a small startup company. And more recently, for about the past 10 years, I've actually been working with companies that have been trying to adopt cloud native technologies. I was really excited when I came across the cloud native maturity model because it aligns really well with the way that I do discovery with organizations. When I talk to companies and I'm trying to understand where they're at in cloud native, trying to understand where they're at to figure out where they're going, this cloud native maturity model is a method to do that. So I realize this is really a great topic for everyone in the cloud native space. My name is Mark Abrams. I came to SUSE through the Rancher Labs acquisition, where I was a field engineer. I was a field-facing engineer, and I was evangelizing K3S and cloud native edge for some time. And so let me get started with kind of what this cloud native maturity model is. I know there's not a bunch of you in the room here, but I actually think this is relevant probably to everybody that's at this conference, whether you're starting new to Kubernetes or whether you're well into Kubernetes. I hope that if you're just starting out with Kubernetes, that what you take away from this is the importance of using something like a maturity model to accelerate your Kubernetes journey. And then if you're already using Kubernetes, I hope that what you take away from this is that you can get unstuck. Because a lot of the organizations that I work with, that we see, they get so far and then they kind of churn and they can't quite seem to grow their Kubernetes footprint, their cloud native footprint. And the cloud native maturity model really is a guide for cloud native, right? It's a framework for measuring your cloud native maturity. And if you can measure it, you can map it. So you can say, where am I and where am I going? In this maturity model, and there are others, there's a software maturity model that's been in use for years by game development companies and other companies in software. This particular one has 5 different levels and 5 key organizational areas. And in order to really understand where we're going, we need to understand where we are. So let's see if we can unpack the cloud native maturity model. By the way, this is available online. You can go and Google it. You can chat GPT it, but you might as well just Google it. It's on the CNCF website. And I am not, by the way, a part of the cloud native maturity model SIG. So I don't know if any of you in the room are. Please let me know. But I feel like this presentation might actually present some criticism of CNMM, and I normally wouldn't just do this in a public forum without actually talking to the SIG first. But as I was going through it, as I was reviewing it, I realized that there are some things about this. While it's very exciting to me and I think it's a good start, it hasn't been updated since 2023. And I think there are some things that need some work. So, perhaps I'll get more involved. I might try and get SUSE more involved. But I think it's also a really good place to start, and there's a lot we can do with it. So the 5 levels are build. That's level 1. This is a foundation. This is like you're in pre-production. You're in non-production trying to do cloud native stuff. At level 2, you're moving towards production. They call this the operate level. And then at level 3 is scale. And this is kind of a funny one because depending who you talk to, what scale means is very different. And you'll see that throughout this cloud native maturity model, there's a heavy focus on cloud native maturity for operators. But scale of infrastructure is different than scale for, say, a developer and an engineering team. And so scale is one of these vague areas, and I'll get into it a little more. And I know we started a little late, so we may have less time. Level 4 is improvement, and of course, the whole way you're improving. So I'm not sure this title is great for level 4, but you're kind of out of the woods from the scaling problem. And then level 5 is adapt. And if you look at the cloud native maturity model, whoops, lost audio for a minute there. If you look at the level 5 documentation, they use the word utopia here. I don't know any company that has ever achieved utopia in any technology. So I think maybe the language could change a little bit there. Again, we're always adapting through all these levels, so could use potentially a change. Now, within each level of this maturity model, there are 5 dimensions. And the dimensions, they actually added business outcomes kind of late in this process of building the maturity model. The people, process, and policy, this is something that if you've worked in an enterprise organization for any amount of time, you know that this is the thing that really any organization adopting a technology struggles with, because the same technology in a different business just is done differently. And so really what they decided to do with this maturity model is to use business outcomes as a driver for how to achieve the goals within each of these levels. So they use these 5 dimensions as a way to help determine what your level of maturity is within, or these dimensions to help understand what that level is. I'm going to get into kind of each dimension a little bit. So first of all, at level 1, when we're building this thing, the people, in terms of people, teams are new to this technology. As I said, this is a testing ground. So you end up with people who don't know what they're doing. They don't know what Kubernetes is. They're exploring new technologies. There's often limited organizational support, and the initiative's often in a proof of concept phase or maybe even skunkworks. What's interesting is if you look at the CNMM documentation, they say that there is a business buy-in to the project. And what I've personally found is that at this level, there is not always business buy-in to a project like this. The processes are pretty much, we don't know what they are yet, right? So their change control is not really well defined because we don't know what's changing or how it's changing. And you'll see that through all of these dimensions, essentially, there's no documentation on policy because we don't know what the policy should be because all of this is too new. And what we really know is that technology. We know that we want to use cloud native. We probably know that we're going to use containers and Kubernetes at this point. But maybe not. I mean, I've talked to a number of people here today that have just said they're using containers and they haven't moved to Kubernetes yet. So dimension 1 is just the beginning. At level 2, we've got more dimensional challenges. As I said, this is the cloud native foundation is established, and you're kind of transitioning towards production. You're not yet in production. And as I describe these things, I'm saying, the meaning of if you did an assessment and you found that you have pockets of expertise emerging, then you would say your people are at level 2, potentially. And it's kind of a summary of there are other things you can measure. I just pulled out some highlights. But there are other things you can measure within each of these dimensions. And so the reality is that at this level, at level 2, we're trying to operate and move towards production, but we're in these basic phases of everything, and we still don't have a really solid framework for developing Kubernetes or developing a cloud-native solution. The you start to see at this level, they say that if you have policies that you're starting to agree upon, then your policy could be marked as a level 2. If you have an app that's moving to production, then your technology could be at level 2. The reality is, what we see is that companies come to us and they say, we want to move this app to production. We're going to do a POC of Kubernetes. And in 3 months, we're going to move that app to production. And it doesn't always work that way, but the way companies operate is very different than the cloud native maturity model. So I think what you have to do is take a look at, again, where you are. You have to assess what is your current state and not try and shoot for, oh, well, we want to get to level 5, so we're going to throw all these things in. And you have to really take a deep look at where you're at to know where you're going to go. This one, the dimensional challenges here are that you now have this production system. And the problem is that the scaling, as I said, is what is the definition of scale here? So how do I know if we're really in level 3? We're still seeing user resistance from the people. Maybe we've gotten so good at this that we're using the Kubernetes ecosystem, but we're using it so much that we have duplicate tools going on or duplicate processes. We've created this proliferation of Kubernetes everything, cloud native everything. And so this is what they call, in the cloud native maturity model, they call this the messy middle. And to be honest, most companies, I think, are stuck at the messy middle. When they get into Kubernetes, when they get into cloud native, there's just this churn in this space. And we see this at large enterprises. We see it at small enterprises. Maybe it's OK. Maybe that's as far as you want to go. But what I'm trying to address here in this talk is that I think if you look at where you're at, you can actually go further and you can do greater things with the organization. And reach those business outcomes. And that's what it all comes back to, is what are the business outcomes? You know, notice in the dimensional challenges, I don't list any business outcomes because the business outcomes are unique to every institution. And so those get defined by the business as to what those would be. In technology, you know, I think every technology I've ever worked with, multiple logging systems exist because everybody wants to build their own logging system. We start to get into things like monitoring, but some of the companies we work with try and do this right at the outset. They try and do this as part of their POC where they integrate observability or monitoring or things like that. So level 3, the messy middle. And we only have a little bit more time. We only have about 4 more minutes according to this. So I'm going to just briefly go through this stuff. I would like, if you have questions, just throw them at me. Don't hesitate at any point. We don't need to stop for Q&A at the end. So level 4 is improvement. And the focus shifts to improving your security, your policy, your governance. I think what you'll see, and then this level 5 adapt, looking back, what are you doing? This is the highest stage of maturity where the organization is adapting and optimizing. What you will see is that nobody is at a level whatever for all of their things. And so what this maturity model is good for is that it gives you a framework to do an assessment. And here's an example assessment. And if we look at the policy string, the policy thread that sort of sticks out towards me, and that's at a 1 on this chart. And so what you'll see is that the technology, we've got all this great technology, we've advanced really far with our tech, but our policy isn't keeping up. And so we can create these really powerful diagrams and charts from an assessment that we can then take to leadership, to an executive leadership team, to management, to say, hey, you know, if we want to grow, we need to try and grow these things more equally. We need to build out our policy, and then we can start to think about what that means and how to do it. But you have to get backing from the highest levels of leadership and from the organization, because the technology alone isn't going to cut it. One of the things I didn't talk about is cost. Is cost a hidden dimension? No, it's not listed as a dimension at all. In fact, what they talk about cost a little bit in the cloud native maturity model. And what they really talk about is that cost will not go down when you start using cloud native. And this is like a real shocker to a lot of organizations. You're adopting a new technology. It's not immediately going to have an effect on your business. And so things like the cloud native maturity model can help you provide real insights into the idea that it's worth doing, it's worth moving to cloud native. We can eventually decommission our legacy stuff, but here's what we need to do. Here's the things that need to happen in order for us to get to that point where we say, all right, these legacy apps can be rolled down, or our virtual machines, we can reduce the footprint and start to move to cloud native. The other thing that the cloud native maturity model doesn't really address is the maturity of adoption versus the maturity of consumption. So with adoption, it really addresses maturity of adoption. And adoption is adoption of the technology. So the cloud native maturity model really talks about how to get your organization to adopt cloud native technologies, and it's really valuable. But I have customers who come to me and say, all right, we did everything, we use all your tools, the adoption of the technology is there, but nobody's consuming the thing we built. If we build it, they will come is not actually a thing in this space. So we have to figure out how to do the maturity of consumption, and I think this is a place where the cloud native maturity model could grow, that we need more information about how do we get the consumption. It addresses it a little. There are little bites and bits about how to do it, but I think it could get better. Some assessment tools, if you want to do this. I'm not a project manager. I'm sure a project manager could give you a lot more clarity over what tools you should use. There's a tendency to do your own self-assessment, run a survey, do some self-assessment, and it's a good start. It's not a great long-term solution because you'll get much more honest responses. You'll get higher up in the organization. If you can work with executive leadership, if you can get people to talk about the real problems that they might not share with you if you're doing a self-assessment. So you may need to go and get a third party to work with who can help you do an assessment and get to a level of maturity. Here's an example of a survey question based on business. Let's see, this is business goals. You'll notice there are 6 bullet points here. I'm not going to read through all of this, but what I did here for this simple survey is I added a level 0. So there's no level 0 in the cloud native maturity model, but this represents we haven't even entered the level 1 yet. There's this state of chaos or this state of, and the CNMM doesn't address that at all, but other cloud native maturity models, it's kind of a part of how they function, is to say we're not even in it yet. Well, we're out of time, so thank you for coming. Good luck in your cloud native journey, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.